Is that okay? I didn't do something wrong.
Well, we just started the broadcast, so folks, if you've just joined us, we'll be getting started here in a few minutes. You can just sit tight. Everyone should be on mute anyway, but Tom, your screen looks good. Get started. Thanks so much for joining in for our monthly Connected Conservation webinar series. This month we actually have 3 webinars as a part of our monthly series. My name is Cass Hardy, and I work in the Biological Resource Division for the NRSS Directorate, and I serve as the team lead for our Connected Conservation Community of Practice. We have a really exciting presentation today. Before we dive into that, just a couple of little housekeeping things. If you do have a question, feel free to plug that into the navigation panel. Throughout the presentation, we'll collect those and open it up for questions at the end. But you will be able to use your phone line to ask questions as well once Tom finishes his presentation. In addition to that, I did drop a couple of links into the chat box. So if you have not had a chance to browse through our Connected Conservation internal toolkit, there's a lot of resources in there. In addition to that, we also plugged in a link to a partner page that we have on the Network for Landscape Conservation, so our friends and partners can access that as well. Just to do a quick introduction, we have an ecologist from the Upper Columbia Basin Network, Tom Roadhouse, with us today. And we're excited to have him join us to talk about bats and some cooperative work that he's been working on in conjunction with Connected Conservation. He'll have a presentation in the last 25, 30 or so minutes, and then we'll open up the lines for questions at the end. All of our webinars are recorded, so if you know someone who missed today, feel free to reach out to them and let them know that they can find it in both of those links that we plugged into the chat box. All right, with that said, Tom, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you, and we'll get started.
All right, thanks a lot, Cass. And thanks to everybody for taking time to join the webinar today. This is a really special opportunity for my colleagues and me to sort of engage with this ongoing conversation about doing more and better connected conservation that's being hosted here by this webinar series. So thanks to the Network for Landscape Conservation and the Park Service for providing this forum. I've actually really become quite interested in the content that Cass was just advertising, the Connected Conservation Toolkit, and some of the other material that Network for Landscape Conservation has available is actually really, really helpful. And a lot of the kind of ideas and approaches and tools that they are providing, you will see reflected here in this presentation in terms of vehicles for pooling funds and other strategies for moving things forward. So yeah, with no further ado, I'm going to jump to the next slide because this one's rather boring. And any real meaningful discussion about doing connected conservation has to start with a lot of folks from different places, different organizations, all pulling together. In this case, on behalf of bats, often with smiles on their faces. Of course, not always. And so, in a nutshell, this is kind of my take-home message. Now, I'd feel a little bit remiss if this was it in the end of the presentation. There's a bit more to say, but anyway, if you get one thing from the talk, maybe this is it right here. So your work is done, maybe. In any case, yeah, a lot of people pulling together here. Way too many to mention that I've interacted with, and there's a whole lot of hardworking, good folks out there that I don't even know and haven't worked with, except perhaps by name and reputation. So it's a big community of practice, and it is inherently all about connected conservation. And I'm going to try and motivate why bats and why connected conservation with this presentation. There's a real natural linkage here. Of course, doing connected conservation for bats would be nothing without the bats, so we got to celebrate the bats. And what a remarkable group of animals, incredible diversity in form and function, the ways in which they make a living are remarkable, and also kind of intuitively lead us to doing multi-jurisdictional, highly collaborative work, and sort of breaking down silos among organizations and agencies and departments and divisions. So that's sort of my long-winded intro. What I want to do then is, by way of an outline here, is I'm going to talk about why bats and why bats and connected conservation go so well together, and then talk a bit about what the Park Service has done, and then hone in on a specific approach the Pacific West region of the Park Service has initiated with partners. Oh yeah, I forgot about this slide. Grease the skids with a little bit of humor here, just to brighten your day, and further additional brevity. So she's wondering, I guess we're all wondering, what is it I'm driving at here? What about bats? What makes bats so special and so in need of connected conservation kinds of strategies? Happy Halloween, by the way, or at least we're on the cusp of it. And this child's drawing clearly suggests that there's an eagerness for that event, at least among some of the kids in the neighborhood here. And so it's not the fangs, it's not the spooky eyes and eyebrows and the pointy wing, or ears rather, even though those are pretty cool. It's really, it's all about the wings. And so what I want to highlight here is that bats fly, and this is quite special actually. Bats are in fact the only mammal capable of true powered flight. And we think about the evolution of flight in vertebrates kind of in three distinct lineages: the flying dinosaurs, the pterodactyls, the birds, and then bats. And each of these lineages sort of approached and solved the challenge of flight quite differently. And the way bats do it is reflected in the name of their order, in which in Linnaean classification we place all bats. It's the Chiroptera, which means hand wing, and you can see that here with this flying fox skeleton, these elongated finger and hand bones, the carpal and metacarpal bones. This is an even cooler way to see it, which is a real bat, a live bat, a spotted bat in flight with incredibly crisp photography showing this hand wing physiology. This photograph was taken by my friend and colleague Michael Durham. It's remarkable. It's one of my favorites that he's done. I know quite a few of you, perhaps in the Park Service, have worked with Michael. He's an exceptional photographer and videographer, and this just reflects his good work. So I'm going to show a few more of his photos throughout the presentation. And geez, you know, I could spend like a whole webinar just on this photograph alone. There's so much to look at and talk about here. But one thing I want to highlight is that the hand wing of bats allows bats to change the shape. Just as you can change the shape of your hand and create it, you know, create more curvature or not, bats do the same thing with their wings. Allows them to be incredibly maneuverable. And again, this is quite distinct from, let's say, for example, what birds do. Turns out, though, that flight, especially in the ways in which bats fly, and the combination of flight and echolocation, which I'll add as an aside, is not quite as unique in bats as flight is. Think about marine mammals and shrews even will echolocate. Nonetheless, bats echolocate well, and they use it to great advantage, and in combination with flight has really allowed bats to radiate and diversify out into all the nooks and crannies of the world, save Antarctica. But it does have some trade-offs. Bats are constrained by tight energy budgets, and this has, of course, a lot of intuitive implications for contemporary conservation issues and challenges and threats that face bats, and then it also helps us think about best practices and effective strategies. In order for these tight energy budgets to really pencil out, bats need to, well, they have evolved, I should say, these, and they kind of manifest these slow life history strategies, and slow relative to other mammals of their size, let's say voles and shrews, that kind of have taken the live fast and die young approach, party hardy, so to speak. Bats take it easy. and they have small litters over the course of lifetime, few young relative to what other mammals of their size are doing, and live a long time. 20, 30 years is not uncommon in the wild, so adult survival rates, by and large, over evolutionary timescales, have been quite high. Bats use hibernation and prolonged torpor as a strategy to cope with an uncertain environment, particularly in temperate regions of the world. You add all that up with also the fact that bats tend to be central place foragers, and they range widely out of this central place. So they'll move from a day roosting location, perhaps a flake of bark, as is shown in this photograph on the right, move out and travel typically tens of kilometers on a night, at least in a lot of the North American species and temperate zone European species that I'm familiar with. And that is really quite remarkable in terms of space use, the scale of space use. And immediately it suggests that landscape scale conservation, connected conservation strategies are going to be important. But they return back to place. So bats exhibit high site fidelity in remarkable ways. And here's a neat anecdote that just popped up a couple weeks back, literally just down the street from my office here. A bat was recaptured at the same site that had been banded at 20 years ago by some colleagues working for the U.S. Forest Service. And that's a pretty neat story. Of course, actually, it's not all that unusual. There are a lot of these kinds of stories out there, but it is a pretty neat example. Here's another one. Some colleagues, Carol Chambers and graduate students from Northern Arizona University, tracking spotted bats in the Grand Canyon. And they found that these spotted bats were routinely cruising those canyon corridors. 30 kilometers in a night was not at all unusual to chase down big moths. And so just give you a feel for the scale of movements that are quite typical just on a routine kind of summer night. Bats also exhibit really high species diversity. They're the second most speciose order of mammals worldwide. There's over 1,000 species of bats in the world. Over 50 or so, depending on how you slice and dice it, in North America. And the National Park Service, a system of parks and protected areas that the National Park Service stewards, is home to at least 50 species. We actually summarized a lot of this in a recent publication that is a really good reference for these kinds of statistics and information. So I direct you to that if you'd like to know more. But all of these bats and more are actually found in at least one park in the national park system. What I think is really important is to underscore the fact that a lot of the widespread species, the most widespread species, for example, the hoary bat, little brown bat, occur in hundreds of park units. And interestingly enough, these widespread species are now actually some of the most threatened, just with the sort of these new emergent threats, white nose syndrome, and the advent of the expanding footprint of the wind power industry and the collisions that bats have with wind turbines. These are both the two new major conservation threats, at least in North America. And so suddenly all of these park units kind of are confronted with the same resource management, stewardship challenge. And of course, when many people have the same problem, it suggests that there may be a common solution or a suite of common solutions, such as doing, coordinated, highly collaborative, connected conservation. Here's a map of kind of how this looks across the country. High species diversity really peaking in the desert Southwest, but not restricted to that area. For example, the Appalachian Highlands, even the Great Lakes area, the northern portion of the Pacific Northwest, all exhibiting high species diversity. And we ought not to be too National Park Service centric. We can, even though the summaries haven't quite been done in the same way, we assume, we know basically that National Refuge System would exhibit similar patterns, for example. So there are a lot of landscapes, Park Service and our partners, our neighbors that are dealing with these issues and that really need to pull together and do connected conservation work. I've already suggested this, but bats are dying, in fact, in unprecedented numbers. I mentioned earlier that over evolutionary timescales, bats have enjoyed relatively high adult survival rates. And this is kind of a key aspect of understanding their population dynamics. And suddenly, there is a big wrench in that plan. White nose syndrome and large numbers of wind turbines in some places, not everywhere, but in some places are killing many bats. To put some scale to this, just a few short years after the outbreak of white nose syndrome in North America, best guesstimates, responsible guesstimates, and these numbers are hard to dial in, but best available information suggests that we were dealing with mortality, a carcass count of 5 to 6 million bats, and of course we assume that number has grown. And it is now affects really the whole contiguous lower 48 in southern Canada. That's a lot of animals. It really is one of the greatest wildlife catastrophes of our time. Imagine if we were dealing with 5 to 6 million pilot whales washing up the shores of Cape Cod, for example. So it turns out that these bats are small and cryptic, and we are not faced with these with hundreds and thousands of carcasses rotting on the street corners. Otherwise, if we were, we would have seen an even bigger outcry than what has already been exhibited. So it's a big deal, and one that we shouldn't really misunderstand the scale and scope of this. Another really nice resource is from Tom O'Shea and colleagues at USGS Fort Collins office, where they sort of showed how the mortality events that are affecting bats has really changed just in a few short years. What were the big conservation threats in the past? Kind of bushmeat trade, Southeast Asia, other issues among the flying foxes and islands Pacific. That's completely changed now, and now we're really dealing with worldwide the wind turbine issue, and then in North America the white nose syndrome problem. Here's another way to see it. White nose syndrome spread across the country very rapidly. It now affects many park units and, of course, neighboring jurisdictions and landscapes, and is a problem across the whole continent. And that's, again, suggests that there's got to be connected conservation types of strategies in hand. Admittedly, this figure is not terribly intuitive. I'll walk you through it, but as best I could come up with. I wanted to show, in just one fell swoop, by way of summary, why bats, why connected conservation. So here, the blue is Crater Lake National Park, surrounded by Forest Service land in Oregon. So immediately, we're dealing with multi-jurisdictional, kind of a complex landscape, different entities, federal, state, what have you. And consider the southern portion of Crater Lake having this little appendage, they call it the Panhandle, and there's some habitat management, forest thinning activities going on down there. They want to know how that's impacting bats. And that's a neat question, and certainly there's an answer that could be gleaned by doing survey work just in that area, but it is awfully small. It's 2 kilometers by 1 kilometer wide if you look at the scale bar, and it's rather myopic to consider status and trend of bats without looking outside across the fence line, so to speak. And so we really need to be scaling up and doing coordinated work at much broader scales, especially when you consider how these bats move around and how these conservation threats move around. So I threw this other map in here. Even Yellowstone National Park is big, but by scale, by standards of the way we really need to inform ourselves about what's happening with bat populations at regional and even range-wide scales. Even Yellowstone National Park starts to become a bit small and myopic without considering what's happening in surrounding landscapes. So in summary, the scales of bat movements and the scales of the bat conservation threats really, I would say, require connected conservation. Park Service has emerged as a leader in doing this, but certainly I don't want to oversell the Park Service, not in isolation. In fact, there are many leaders, and there's been a lot of scaffolding that's gone on, and the Park Service has benefited from leadership by other organizations, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, for example, and many others, really, and in different corners and quarters, depending on regional neighborhoods or federal, kind of national neighborhoods. The leadership has traded hands. We've sort of passed the baton. But that being said, Park Service has done some really cool work, and we've tapped into our own internal expertise to share with our partners across the fence line. So, for example, we used our inventory monitoring skills and abilities to help develop better ways of managing that survey data, and there has been kind of a gap in that capacity, and so we've been able to share our tool sets, and this has become a template that's been used by, for example, the USGS and others. Park Service is nothing but well experienced at working with visitors. That's what we do, how we make a living, and so we're good, and we're very interested in doing outreach and education, holding public events, trying to motivate the general public to feel engaged and feel stewardship, a sense of stewardship for bats. A lot of neat work that's happened there, and those experiences and toolkits and things have really been beneficial to our partners. Park Service, again, nationwide, was really a leader in trying to figure out how to kind of communicate with visitors that we need to be careful about how we do that, how we enter into show caves and other kinds of cave resource environments without inadvertently spreading the fungus, which causes white nose syndrome. Park Service was integral in helping stand up and really launch and motivate what is an exemplary connected conservation effort, initiative. It's this plan to monitor bats in a coordinated way across the entire continent of North America. Nothing short of ridiculously overambitious, but nonetheless, it's going, and we're making strides there. And the Park Service has been very helpful there. Park Service was also really engaged with its partners, particularly the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, in developing in the beginning a national plan to try and coordinate response to the disease. So a lot of really cool work. This is a fast flyover, and all very much kind of multi-jurisdictional and very connected conservation kinds of themes here. Something that I really want to highlight has been investment in training. So the Park Service allocates monies each fiscal year since the I don't know, about 2011 or 12. Directed to allocate funds specifically to help the agency with its partners respond to the white nose syndrome crisis. And so on a year-by-year basis, the Biological Resource Division, stewarded by actually the Wildlife Health Branch, has helped move funds and therefore capacity around the agency. And one of the things that it has done is invest in these trainings. So here's some photos from Lava Beds National Monument. There's been a number of these that have been held around the country, and actually some really cool online ones. So here's Dominic Cardia in the bottom there at I think the National Conservation Training Center, building this interactive online webinar that then was also recorded and become a resource that many people can tap into and get credit for. It's part of the employee online training portal. And so it's really helped build a community of practice for doing bat-connected conservation. It's really quite a feat, quite an accomplishment, a collective accomplishment that I think is really worth celebrating. So in a nutshell, connected conservation in the Park Service sort of looks a lot like this. We're in close collaboration with partners. We do three things well, and striving to always do better, and that would be managing bat and human interactions in parks. Unfortunately, there's an increasing number of these because we have more sick and dying bats on the landscape. Education and outreach, and then the kind of behind the scenes heavy lifting of doing the science and management, resource management protection. So these are kind of like three legs of a stool that make for a pretty well-rounded strategy to help build resiliency in our bat populations. But the key is we are doing this increasingly with partners across multi-jurisdictional landscapes. And so if there's any kind of a silver lining, I suppose, and there's probably more than one, I hope, but at least one out of this white nose syndrome crisis or this general sort of contemporary conservation crisis facing bats, it has been an increasing appetite and effort and enthusiasm for reaching across the fence lines and breaking down these jurisdictional silos. In the Pacific West region, we have done much the same. We've seen much the same. I don't want to hoe the same ground here. What I want to highlight instead is this rather simple but very helpful and effective proactive white nose syndrome response strategy, spearheaded by Denise Louie at the regional office. And what she did is just intuitively, assemble a team of experts, some folks in the region who were already kind of versed on the bat situation. They were bat biologists of one flavor or another, or had already, spent some time in the trenches and thinking about these issues. And so this team was ready to go and hit the ground running, I suppose back in 2011 or 12 or 13, when we really began to wrestle with the fact that white nose syndrome was coming. It was coming out west sooner than later. And it sure did arrive quickly here in 2016. And so this team has helped the region kind of develop and sort of facilitate guidance and communication and ultimately striving for these connected conservation solutions. Some of the most effective work that's been done has been to coordinate from the region the proposals going to the Biological Resources Division for year-to-year funding support, and to kind of have those proposals coordinated and all sort of talking to one another has been really, really effective. And these have tended to be focused on two fundamental activities. Maybe I'm missing a couple, but disease surveillance and population monitoring, probably should add education and outreach as well. So that folks are not stepping on each other's toes or walking over top of one another, and we're not reinventing the wheel all the time. So out of this, drum roll please, comes this, the kind of the focus of the talk, sort of a long-winded intro here, but we're finally there. The Northwestern Bat Hub. And so the Park Service really invested the startup funds to try and make this happen. And quickly we had some great partners from different organizations follow suit and pitch in and pool funds. So these are some screenshots actually from the website. You can go there. I think if you just Google Northwestern Bat Hub, you'll get there. It's housed within the Human and Ecosystem Resiliency and Sustainability Lab, which is a growing entity on the young Oregon State University Cascades campus in Bend, Oregon, which is really set up to do really facilitate this kind of connected conservation work for a lot of different taxa and ecosystems, and ultimately striving towards trying to help, build resiliency and sustainability down the road. A great picture by Michael Durham. This photo actually that Bat Hub has pilfered. Actually, I enabled that, but it's a photo that Michael took of bats flying out of Craters of the Moon National Monument and Preserve in southern Idaho. A really neat photo there. Anyway, so yeah, we cross-fertilize and we share a lot of cool stuff when we can. So the Bat Hub is designed to be a center of gravity for interagency collaboration, and the logos that I've pasted in here are the ones that are most meaningfully invested right now, but there are some others who are engaged, not NGOs, the Nature Conservancy, Moses Coulee area, Washington, other organizations happening too. But these are the primary initial funders and sort of primary partners. The idea here is that we're pooling resources so that no one entity organization really has to bear the brunt of costs, that we can distribute the costs a bit more broadly and really leverage those resources so that we can do more and better work. The goal is to promote and do bat conservation, to inform conservation, evidence-based decision-making, and the main lift right now, the focus is to help implement North American Bat Monitoring Program in the Pacific Northwest. Not at the exclusion of other activities, some research supporting and complementary research and monitoring activities. But so I want to say the Northwestern Bat Hub is not synonymous with NA-BAT, but it is a partner in that endeavor and very focused right now on trying to make that all happen. The hub works by consolidating expertise among a small staff and some outside collaborators, statisticians from the USGS, for example, and others. And making that expertise available to the partnership. Little conceptual diagram here, again, kind of center of gravity idea that the Bat Hub is helping pull together limited funds and resources, and making that happen for everybody. So the way in which we're doing this to date, kind of three primary pathways, using the Cooperative Ecosystem Studies units, which Park Service in particular has benefited from. I particularly have benefited from it because it allows me to work with OSU Cascades as a in a cooperative way, because I like to do this kind of work and I want to help. But we've also seen challenge cost share kinds of vehicles being used. Forest Service, for example, at the regional level, has done this with Bat Hub, so that the Bat Hub crew can get out and survey on Forest Service lands and benefit that partnership and contribute to this broader regional effort. Professional services, just simple fee-for-service kinds of contracts, are also in play. For example, Idaho Department of Fish and Game is benefiting by just having the Bat Hub process bat calls and help them get out from under their data management load there. A lot of the funding goes towards salary and benefits, and one of the things I want to highlight are the ability to retain field technicians, student interns, former students, early career biologists, and others who are able to get out and really work across landscapes, move among the jurisdictions rather fluidly. That's a big deal, and it's really created some exciting opportunities for us. Equipment too is an important thing. We have specialized equipment to make this all happen, and there's too much need and not enough funding. So what we do is we share detectors, we share data storage capacity, and we facilitate all this via this Bat Hub, and that's turned out to be really helpful. Coordination is really important. You know, there's a lot of grassroots kind of bottom-up work happening here, but too much bottom-up without a little bit of top-down direction and coordination is problematic. There's a real need to have somebody kind of watching what's happening and helping, for example, align local projects where we have local bat research and monitoring efforts that we know could also, you know, kind of kill two birds with one stone, so to speak. Could be producing data to do two things, you know, to meet local project needs and meet local objectives, but also contribute to this broader regional or ultimately nationwide effort. You know, so other kinds of things that I've listed here with the text, troubleshooting, you know, helping folks do the work. There's been a lot of accomplishment just in terms of field effort. Over 150 of these grid cells. This is the way in which the North American Bat Monitoring Program is being implemented. But as you can see here across the large landscape, a lot of work being done. Training is important, as I mentioned earlier here, providing tools, data collection capacity using Survey 123, which is a Esri ArcGIS phone app. Things like that are really, really helpful. Here are a couple of other really cool examples. So in Oregon, for example, it's turned out that we're increasingly confronted with a wildfire season. And in the low elevation desert landscapes in particular, we can get shut out too early. And we've had to learn how to deal with that. And really, admittedly, it's not ideal to say, for example, have all of our surveys bundled into a pre-fire season June period, because it kind of confounds seasonality and, you know, things like that. But we're going to have to overcome that and maybe perhaps use statistical techniques to deal with that, because logistically, it's increasingly impossible for us to move crews around safely in you know, the late summer in some of these portions. And so the Bat Hub is providing that kind of direction and coordination. Another neat example here is just sharing calendars, very simple stuff. So here is an example screenshot for Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, and what this is showing is that the Bat Hub helps the ODF&W biologists from different districts share a limited number of bat detectors and just move those around so that we can get more spatially extensive surveys conducted with limited amounts of equipment. Dealing with, I shouldn't say dealing with, really engaging with and working closely with private landowners, building the partnerships that are so important, has been greatly facilitated by you know, having Oregon State University Bat Hub do this kind of work. It's a bit different than maybe having like a federal agency come in, which has different kind of potentially antagonistic kind of interactions. And so this has been really helpful and quite exciting. In fact, here's our Bat Hub crew, a couple of crew members feeling apparently very excited about that. Actually, it's neat to be able to work on working landscapes. I think really that's the intent of this photograph. It's very cool to get out and see what's happening on these other places. And in fact, we really, really need private land engagement, because we simply can't understand what's happening about our bats without understanding what's going on in these working landscapes. So that's really important. So I mentioned this example a little bit earlier, but there is a real opportunity. It's quite exciting to see how local resource management or monitoring kinds of projects, or graduate student research projects that are very local in scale for specific objectives, can also contribute to broader, regional, range-wide connected conservation kinds of initiatives. So here, the Bat Hub has helped the Crater Lake and Lassen Volcanic National Park design their studies in such a way that the data, at least some of their data, are compatible and can be rolled up with these broader efforts. And that's a real exciting advancement. A lot of times folks are like, well, okay, I don't understand the scale of this regional effort is misaligned with my own local jurisdiction or my own district or wildlife area management needs. Well, it turns out you can actually kind of do both if you're careful and thoughtful about it. Bat Hub has really helped us kind of map our way conceptually through new and improved workflows. There's a whole kind of business process model thing that happens, and I'm sure this is something that is transcends just the bat world. That a lot of other connected conservation endeavors are confronted with just kind of how does this all flow? How do we move data around? How do we communicate? How do we stay connected between our initial goals and objectives and where we wind up down the road, and not have mission creep and all that kind of stuff? So that's been really important. We've actually published some of this here recently. This is a little reference to a recent article in the journal Ecology and Evolution. It's been very helpful. It's kind of sharing what we've learned. A specific little example. This is very batty in nature, so I apologize for the non-bat folks on the webinar. But one of the issues that comes up all the time is kind of coping with bat acoustic recording. So we record bats that call at night. We don't necessarily know which species is making those recordings or producing those calls. How do we allocate our resources and spend the time wisely kind of verifying those calls and assigning species IDs to those? That's turned out to be a big kind of research and development and R&D need. The Bat Hub was really central in helping do that and facilitating that kind of learning. There's been a lot of feedback back and forth. That's really important. Just overall quality assurance, quality control process is really, important. You need, too much grassrootsiness, and you've sort of lost enough central, quality control. Getting from data into information. Sort of back to this conceptual diagram a little bit. Like, well, again, from left to right, from top left to bottom or right, whatever, defining goals and objectives, making sure that all the way through the process that somehow lines up with what we're ultimately trying to do, is make inferences about what's happening with bats. So for example, increasingly we're looking towards broad sort of distribution modeling and occupancy modeling that then can show change over time across broad spatial extents, broad geographic extents. And so getting to that is, of course, no trivial matter, and this kind of hub type setting where folks can work together and tap into some central expertise has really been helpful. So do we need more hubs? How might we do that? My colleague USGS, who's running the national effort to really international effort to lift the North American Bat Monitoring Program, Brian Reichert, is considering different strategies. One might be to tap into the existing Fish and Wildlife Service structure. One of the nice things about this is that it lines up with states, and so blocks of states can work together. For example, here, Fish and Wildlife Service Region 5, and you have a group of states, many of which are small, and there's a real economy of scale there if they can collaborate and work together. Another way to go might be to tap into the new proposed DUI structure, depending on how that unfolds. There's some real potential there as well. These look pretty good from a sort of bat perspective. and a lot of these line up with state boundaries as well. Any number of possibilities. It's not so much can we, but just sort of having the will to move forward and being organized about it. So I know everyone has to get on with their day. I went on a little long. I just want to wrap up with a few parting thoughts here. And again, I really appreciate your patience and hanging in there with me on this. So the Bat Hub and in general, hub-like activities, you know, what do they do for us? They help kind of provide the center of gravity and build economy of scale, really facilitating collaboration. I think one of the biggest benefits that I've seen so far and we've begun to realize is that individual partner investments are leveraged and we can really make greater impact. What I've also seen has been really exciting is just working with the university and with other organizations all as a team, is that we're seeing enhanced stewardship engagement. We're really able to get public, citizen scientists, students, interns, you know, in addition to the, you know, the usual and accustomed professionals, the boring of us, those of us that are into this, because we get paid to do it. We're able to tap into other folks, and that's really actually quite exciting and satisfying, and ultimately really necessary. All this is, of course, for trying to help assess and evaluate and deal with questions about bat population persistence and extinction risk. And here's the misty-eyed, emotional part of the talk. You know, for the future, right? It's kids and our grandkids and stuff. You know, a world without bats is a dim future indeed, and it's not overstated to suggest that such a future is, you know, impossible to ponder. There's a lot of problems here, and you know, there's a whole webinar on this little tidbit that bats provide vital ecosystem services, and obviously I don't have time to go into it, but suffice it to say that without bats, we're in real trouble, and so we really need to do anything and everything we possibly can to try and figure out what's going on and how to really, truly, meaningfully build resiliency in our bat populations. I think it's not an overstatement to suggest that it's of existential importance to us to do this. So something hub-like, you know, some ways in which we can really facilitate collaboration, share limited resources, and really find ways to break down barriers and work together. Is of great importance. And with that, I will end it with a little bit of brevity. Just in case any of you were wondering, bats are not blind, actually. They see quite well. If they were, we would have a different crime fighter. And so anyway, I'll leave you with that thought as you go on about your day and take questions if there's time and energy for that.
Gosh, thank you so much, Tom. And maybe I'm speaking for everyone here, but I certainly appreciated your character coming through as well as all of your expertise. So thank you for making it enjoyable. We do have a couple of questions in our question box here. So feel free, if you do have a question, go ahead and type it in the navigation panel there for questions. And then I'll also open up the line for everyone as well to speak aloud. But to kick us off, as far as Helen asked, actually, if those of us attending will be able to see the talk again later, we will email out the link to the talk. I'm going to go ahead and, Tom, I'm going to steal back the presenter rights, but just to show folks where they can actually see the different recordings. I'm going to go ahead and show my screen here for a second. So you should be able to see the Connected Conservation Toolkit there. And on our toolkit, this is the place where you can actually register for future webinars. So you can see our next one is on the 17th, focused on mitigation solutions with the Conservation Fund. We have another one on the California Landscape Conservation Network coming up on October 22nd. And then just down below that, you can see all of our recorded webinars going back into 2014. And so following the webinar today, this recording will live here. And then if you're one of our friends or partners joining in for today, you can actually go to the Network for Landscape Conservation website. These two links I plugged into the chat box prior to the call today. starting, and you'll be able to see similarly a laundry list of all of our upcoming webinars and then all of the recorded webinars as well here. We utilize the Network for Landscape Conservation YouTube channel, so they've been really wonderful to work with, and they upload each webinar after they're completed. So with that said, let's take a look and see if there are any other questions. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen here. Okay, it looks like no other questions in our question box. Oh, here's one. This question is, thinking it would be a good idea to have a park partner with the U.S. Forest Service when applying for WNS funding. How would this come about budget-wise? Would the Forest Service be displayed as a contribution in kind? And Tom, while you go ahead and answer that, I'm going to open up all the lines. So go ahead, Tom.
Sure. Okay. Yes, absolutely. And the best source for that kind of guidance would be from BRD, Michelle Durant, and others there. So I wouldn't want to overstep my role there. However, I can just say that absolutely there is real appetite for that, and there are past proposals, including ones that I've been involved with, that have clearly shown the in-kind contribution and the leveraging of the partnership. It makes it easier for the folks who are rating and valuing the different proposals to see the real true value that's embedded there.
Great, thanks, Tom. And while I'm opening up the lines, if you don't want to ask a question aloud, feel free to mute yourself. But just be conscious, there's just over 70 people on, so if you start having some noise in your background, feel free to go ahead and mute your line. Okay, all the lines should be open. If anyone else has a question, they can feel free to ask it aloud now.
Well, that's some deafening silence there. Come on, my friend. What do you got for me? The joys of webinars.
I do have one more question that came in the box, in our question box. It's specifically about having us email an article, I think that you referred to, from Lonnie. And Lonnie, we can definitely do that. So Tom will follow up with you on that and make sure it gets out to everyone.
Yep. One thing I should add is Michelle Durant, let's see, Christy Burnett, I believe a number of folks really in the central office have this BAT subject page and community practice forum. So there's a lot of opportunities to dialogue specifically on the subject of BAT connected conservation. And so you can find those resources.
Yeah, that's a great point, Tom, and I can include all of those links in the follow-up email as well.
All right, thanks.
Denise, I see you have your hand up.
Well, I just wanted to say thank you for a great presentation, Tom, and your enthusiasm and dedication to bat conservation and leadership to bring us to how we can really effectively work together among ourselves and other organizations and agencies.
Well, you're welcome, and thanks, of course, to your leadership as well.
Tom, one more question in our question box. What was the biggest lesson learned from building this partnership?
Well, that's good. It's a good question. I'm actually really glad you asked. I would like to have really sort of stretched out actually and added a slide or two about that, because there have been some painful moments, no doubt, for sure, around just managing the funding and different agreements and ways of pushing money around, and no one organization does it the same way, and nobody has the same deadlines, and different fiscal years start and stop at different times. So it's actually death by 1,000 cuts, really, when you get into it. So we persevere. I would really like to see a more streamlined funding model at some point. I don't know when and how that can happen, given just ongoing kind of perennial uncertainty about where money is going to come from. So it seems as though the short term is we suffer with having to write, many different kinds of agreements all the time, and keeping track of that stuff is a nightmare. Some of it for me and the federal or other state partners. But actually, it's even worse for the poor folks at OSU trying to track all this stuff that's coming in from different places, and they have different budgets to manage. So I'd say that's probably the hardest part. But the best part that comes from that is that they've had a chance to hire and retain and build a small team of really nice people, early career folks, some of the more mature folks, the PI, Dr. Schindeman, Matt Schindeman, the coordinator, Roger Rodriguez, and all these folks out in the ground are just into it, and that's super rewarding despite all the pain and suffering that goes to getting it going.
Great. Well, Tom, thanks so much. Certainly on behalf of the Connected Conservation Community of Practice, we really appreciate all the work you're doing and appreciate the time you take to put the presentation together. Thank you to everyone who tuned in today, and stay tuned for our future webinars. Once again, our next one is on October 17th at 3 Eastern, focused on mitigation solutions with the Conservation Fund. And then we'll have a second one, or third one really, in October 22nd, focused on the California Landscape Stewardship Network. So you can find the registration for each of those on our toolkit site, as well as on the Network for Landscape Conservation site. We look forward to having you participate in future webinars. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Cass.
Thank you.